So I read this book by Julie Smith that is called Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before? And I think this is a must read if you are struggling with anxiety or depression or anything else like mental health related. And Julie noticed, and Julie is the author of this book, and she works as a psychologist, that a lot of her clients told her, why has no one told me this before? They thought that what they felt must have been because of some fault in their brains and that they didn't have it in them to change anything about it. And Julie also noticed that some of her clients basically needed some education on how their mind works and how their body works. And that is why she wrote this book, filled with tools and tips to build resilience for everyday life. So to build life skills. So this book is structured by 8 different chapters, and every chapter covers a different aspect of mental health. So for example, there's a chapter about anxiety, there's a chapter about stress, there's a chapter about how to have a meaningful life. There's a chapter about grief. So here are some useful things that I think are really valuable reading this book. So the first topic that she covers is feeling low or feeling really depressed. So first chapter is called On Dark Places. I think a really valuable thing that she describes is that mood fluctuation is just a part of life. It's just something that is very normal, and it's not really normal to be really stable all the time. So it's a good thing if there are fluctuations, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. And feeling down is more likely to be the result of some unmet need that we have, instead of some brain malfunction or anything. And she also explains that we can take the power out of our negative thoughts by learning and remembering that thoughts are not facts, but they are just thoughts. And besides that perfectionism is our enemy when we are not feeling our best. And on those moments, we can be the most critical of ourselves. So she advises to really keep it small and doable. So start with the basics. So eat healthy and eat enough food. Get your sleep in and get your movement in, exercise. And also don't forget to connect with other people. That's a really important one. Especially when we're not feeling our best. We have the tendency to be by ourselves and not do anything because we don't feel like it. But it's an important thing to, especially then, really try to go out and connect with others. And the second chapter is about motivation. She says that motivation is something that also comes and it goes. This is also a really normal thing. We can't always be 100% motivated, but we do have to learn how to deal with the moments that we're not really motivated, and that we have to learn how to act in this case. So what do we need to do when we're not feeling that motivation? And a lot of times we try to avoid doing different things because we also want to feel like comfortable, and being uncomfortable is a form of discomfort and also stress. So we are built to avoid stress and to avoid discomfort. It can be a little bit difficult to really do something when we're not feeling like it. We can do things to increase that feeling of motivation, like just starting with something, just doing anything, and not thinking that what we have to do has to be perfect in any way. And I notice myself a lot of times that when I just start doing something, that a lot of times then the feeling of motivation will come. But when I wait until the feeling of motivation will come, then I have to wait for a really long time. So the tip is here to just start doing something. But also it's important to learn how to rest and to change our relationship with failure. When we see failure as something that is a sign for us that we have to stop doing it, or that it's not for us, or that it's not working out, then I think that feeling of motivation will disappear really fast. But if we see it as a sign that we're actually being out of our comfort zones and doing something that, doing something new, that we're learning something, then we see failure as a part of the process. And it only means that we're getting better, and it's not something that, it's not a sign that we should quit or anything. So I think it's an important thing to see failure as a good sign. It's a good sign that, it's a sign that we're doing something new, that we're growing, that we're learning. The failure is a part of that process. And also, when we just really don't have that feeling of motivation and it just won't come, the nice thing is that with habits, after a certain time, these become ingrained kind of in our brains. So new neural pathways are being created if we just repeat doing certain things. And this will make it easier to repeat that kind of behavior in the future. So we don't really need to rely on our feeling of motivation, but we're just very used to doing that kind of thing and we don't really have to think about it. In chapter 3, she talks about emotional pain. And like I said before, emotions are not facts, they are feelings. They are very real, they are very real feelings, but they're not true per se. But they can be useful in telling us what we need, what our unmet needs are. So really the goal here is to learn to allow different emotions. So not to try to push them away, but really let them be. As we learned before, emotions come and emotions go. So we also learn that with allowing them, that emotions are not forever. We can deal with emotions, for example, with self-soothing. So we can kind of comfort ourselves when we go through certain emotions. But also a really big part of dealing with emotions is by talking about it. And I noticed that a lot of my clients tell me like, it really help. Like talking about things, it happened, and talking about it is not gonna change it. And that's very true. So talking about it is not gonna change the thing that happened, but talking is really a big part in dealing with emotions and processing it. And chapter 4 is one on grief. And like with every different emotion, it is something that a lot of people have to go through. So you see that if you try to completely block this feeling or completely block the grief that you're experiencing, that it will inevitably come back in the future in a certain way. I noticed that in my work as a psychologist as well. Before I worked with people with chronic pain. So people were referred to us and they had chronic pain, and the issue was that they didn't know where the chronic pain came from. A lot of the clients also were skeptical that they came to a psychologist. They told me like, I have pain and what am I doing here with a psychologist? And the interesting thing that I've learned there is that a lot of unprocessed grief, a lot of unprocessed trauma, unprocessed emotions will result in complaints further down the line. You just see that blocking emotions will result in having issues. So with grief, it is a really important thing to go through this, and if it's too painful to go through this yourself, it's really a good thing to go to a psychologist who can guide you in this process of you experiencing grief. And chapter 5 is a chapter about self-doubt. And again, self-doubt is a part of life. We all doubt ourselves sometimes, so this is again very normal. Receiving criticism though will activate our stress response. So that is why we don't really like it to receive criticism. That is because we are built like this. So rejection and criticism and loneliness is a big threat to our health. And our brain is trying to protect us from this and to keep us safe in a group. So Julie also says that just trying to not care what other people think of you isn't really going to work. But the nice thing is that being a confident person is something that we can learn. We can build this kind of skill. So it's not something that we are born with, but it has to begin with courage. So the courage to change and to want to really, develop yourself and to grow. And in her book, she also talks about the learning model. And in the learning model, it states that it is important to be in kind of this perfect zone. So you can be in your comfort zone. And it's important to kind of step out of that comfort zone that they call the stretch zone. And the stretch zone is the ideal zone in which you can grow. And then there's also the panic zone. And we don't really want to be in the panic zone, because in the panic zone, we are so out of our comfort zones that we don't really want to grow anymore. We just want to be back in our comfort zones. So it's important to really find that balance, that we don't become too comfortable, but we're just in that perfect middle, that we want to learn and we want to grow, and that we feel confident enough to do that, and that we're not too far out of our comfort zones. that becomes too scary. In chapter 6, she discusses the topic of fear. She explains here what happens to us if we avoid feeling anxious. This is only a short-term solution, but in the long term it means that anxiety will only remain or even becomes worse. So we have to learn in some way to deal with the things that makes us feel anxious. And a big part in this is trying to practice with those things. So if we avoid doing things that makes us feel anxious, we'll only confirm our feeling that we can't do it or it's too scary. But if we find the courage to practice with it, then we can learn that it is something that we can do. And then we can become better in doing this, which will give us a little bit more confidence again. And we can also learn to deal with the anxious thoughts that we have. And an interesting thing in this, and this is something that I also tell myself, is that instead of seeing it as something really scary and something that I don't want to do and I want to avoid, I see it as a challenge. So I see it as a practice for me to become better at this, and I see it as something that I can overcome and that I can learn from, and that will make it not maybe feeling less scary, but it changes my view on the thing that is happening. So I view it as something that I want to happen more than when I have the feeling that I just really don't want to do it and I find it really scary. So our thoughts concerning the situation are important also in this, and that is something that we can learn. And in chapter 7, she discusses the topic of stress. And stress is not a negative thing per se. It is a part of life, and it's actually very necessary to have a meaningful life. But we do need to know when we need to rest, and we do need to learn also what our body is telling us that we need. So when it is time to slow down, and what those body signals are that we have to pay attention to. And then it is important to learn how we can slow down. It differs for different people how they can relax. So for some people it's just chilling on the couch, and other person they really want to be active and go for a run, and other people really like breathing exercises. So for example, they meditate or they do yoga. Try to find something that works for you and really make it a priority in your week. And I also read that our mindset concerning stress is important, how stress affects us. So if we see stress as something really negative, then it will have a more negative effect on us than if we see stress as something that can give us a little push, can give us some motivation, can maybe makes us focus more. And if we feel that it has a positive effect on us, on our performance, then it does have a more positive effect on us. So I thought it was also a really interesting perspective on stress. And in the last chapter, chapter 8, she discusses a meaningful life. So we often think that happiness is the purpose of life, but that is just kind of what society is telling us, that we have to be happy all the time, and if we're not feeling happy, that something is wrong. But I think it's a really powerful thing to realize that happiness is something that we can't always feel. Like for example, with different emotion, it is something that comes and something that goes, and it goes with a certain flow. And we can't be motivated all the time, we can't be happy all the time, but also we can't be sad all the time and angry. It is something that goes back to a certain base or a certain mean. And the same thing with happiness, we can't always be happy. And I think it's more, and Julie also says this in her book, that it's better to focus on having a meaningful life than on a happy life. So a meaningful life is a life full of different experiences and full of different emotions. All the emotions are part of being human. A big part in this is building meaningful relationships, so connecting with other people. I really think that we are built for that. So we are built to connect with others. And also research shows again and again that one of the most important factors in how we feel, how happy we are, how resilient we are, is the connections that we have. So the relationships that we build is just a really big predictor of the feeling also of having a meaningful life. So this is it on this book on Why Has No One Told Me This Before by Julie Smith. And I think it is a must read if you are struggling with anxiety, with depression, and if you want to learn more about the things that we can do in dealing with those feelings. So, and this is it for today, and I hope I'll see you next time again. Bye.